We now develop the story even further. On the Skype, we have Labour analyst Terry Bell to give us further depth into this story. Terry, thank you so much for joining us. Good evening to you. There seems no end in strike to this bus driver strike, which is now entering its third week.
Good evening. Yes, I didn't hear anything that was said before, but it is entering its third week, and it's an extremely strange situation that seems to be occurring. Because I've heard a lot over this whole period, and it does appear that the employers are playing a very strange role. I mean, claiming all the five unions have told me, yes, definitely the employers have now moved to 9 to 9.5%, but then the employers say they never did so. However, they've moved back again according to the unions. So I don't know what's gone on. I mean, the point is, I think what we really need to have are the minutes of the various meetings so that we actually do know what is happening. I can't understand why this thing is dragging on. The issues involved seem to be relatively minor, but there does seem to be a concerted attempt, and I think from the employer side, to really put pressure, maybe brace the unions, I don't know, but it is very worrying. Perhaps it has something to do, I mean, let's not forget that bus services get great subsidies from government, a huge multi-million rand subsidies from government per kilometre travel, per passenger taken, etc. So I don't know whether this has something to do with it, but I really think that we need to have some sort of clarity, and it has to come from somewhere. I don't know how, but it is at the moment quite a mess, and it is putting an awful lot of people to a terrible lot of difficulty.
I mean, you mentioned subsidies. Just give us a breakdown of how exactly these subsidies could potentially be the barrier here.
Well, the point is that the government pays subsidies to the employers, to the bus companies. So the bus companies have a huge advantage, for example, on the taxi industry. That's been a long-running sort of dispute from the taxi point of view. The point, however, is that they do get a lot of money from government in terms of subsidy. How that plays into the whole thing, we need to actually look at. We need to have it explained just how much subsidy is paid to whom, at what level, when, how, when, why, etc. And also we have to discover, for example, a bus driver, an incredibly, I find, stressful, especially if it's a metropolitan city, city bus drivers under an incredible stress. Long-distance bus drivers who also have this problem of the second driver, where there's been an argument for years about how much should be paid, and if a driver does not have, as they put it, his foot on the pedal, which means they don't provide adequate sleeping accommodation for the secondary driver. There are all these aspects that continually come up at every single negotiation regarding bus drivers. It seems to have come to a crisis point at this stage, and I think what we need to do is we need to have these discussions out in the open. Let's see who is not playing ball.
I mean, you say that you don't see the reasons why this negotiation process has hit a snag. Let's delve deeper now into the demands that are being put on the table. You say they're not unreasonable, according to you. Talk us through the reasons why they could be such a contentious issue at this point in time. Is it about the wages, or is it just perhaps now wielding power?
No, it's more than about wages. The point is that wages is one of the aspects. The unions have come down quite substantially from their original demand, and the employers have moved up marginally from their original demand, although there's an argument about whether they did or did not move, etc. It's also to do, yes, I think, with power. It's to do with whether the unions should have some sort of say. In other words, should the workers have more say over what is going on, or should the managers be allowed to manage in their own right? I think that all comes into play here. But what I'm trying to say is that you actually have a situation which seems to me to be incredibly confused, where you have even the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration being turned down by the employers. It seems to be a messy business who is blocking whom? As far as I can see, and okay, I admit that I come from a labor viewpoint. However, I think the unions have actually moved to an incredible degree on the wages, on conditions, etc. But the employers have been almost deliberately obstructive, it seems to me, on all the information that has emerged. If they've not been, well, all right, let's have it all out in the open. Let us have an open debate between the employers and the unions. Let us see who is actually inconveniencing millions of commuters around the country. I don't believe that the unions are doing this on purpose. They would not do this. And I actually think that they have a point about their wages, obviously. But we're talking here about 1%, 1.5%. That's what we're talking about, which is hardly going to cripple, particularly if the bus companies, the various transport companies, come out openly and declare what their profits are. Because if a company is in danger of going bust, of collapsing because of an increase in wages, the unions would obviously back down, because there are provisions for exemption in situations like that. So I think that this is a ridiculous. At the moment is that the employers are primarily to blame.
Of course, one of the other issues here is the matter of working conditions. The bus drivers have raised their various concerns about the manner in which their conditions are being allowed to fall through. And the unions issued a joint statement saying that employers in the bus sector have declared war on commuters. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that's an obvious statement to make, because the point is you have to actually win public support for where you stand. And I think they actually have the right to call on that sort of support, because it is a war on commuters. If you're going to keep the buses off the roads for whatever little reason that you're doing it, then you are declaring a war on the commuters. And this is what the unions are basically saying, that we are prepared. There's also another factor, too, that has also been debated at this thing, and that is the outsourcing of various facilities within the bus transport sector, cleaning buses, for example, that sort of thing. Instead of having in-house people who are employed on a permanent basis, this whole idea of outsourcing, which leads to contract labor, which leads to 0 hours. These are all factors that come into play as well, and have been dealt with there, but I don't think have been dealt with adequately at all by the employers.
And before you go, let's just talk about the negotiating powers here. A few weeks, I think it was last week, that the Labour Minister Mildred Oliphant was called in, as well as Transport Minister Blade Nzimande, to try and broker some sort of deal here. Just talk us through the impact as well as the influence that government would have in hopefully finding some sort of resolution here.
Well, I don't think they had any impact whatsoever, because nothing actually happened as a result of that. However, yesterday there was a meeting at Cedar Park in Johannesburg at the conference centre, and the unions, when they went in there, seemed to be quite optimistic. I know some of them, the Transport and Omnibus Workers Union, were saying, well, all right, we're prepared to sort of back down on the pay issue in terms of the 9%, 9.5%, or 8%, 9% and 8.5% in the following year. The unions already backed down on a 3-year deal to a 2-year deal. They went in quite optimistic to that last meeting, where the employers, from all accounts, then said, no, we never did offer you 9% for this year and 8.5% next year. We only offered you 8%. So we're back to square one. This whole negotiation seems to be in a question of moving forward, one step backward, one step forward, 2 steps back. It's an insane situation. Obviously, Blade Nzimande, Mildred Oliphant actually had no impact whatsoever. And I really, at this stage, I think it's a ridiculous situation. What we should have, put them up on a platform and on your TV. Questions. Why do you do that? Why do you do that? And sort it all out.
I think that's a brilliant idea, and it should be something that we look into doing. But the unions say that they're meeting to finalize details of mass action and protests in various parts of the country because of this deadlock.
Well, it's going to happen, and the point is you mustn't forget this again is also complicated by the fact that you also have a tremendous amount of inter-union struggle between various federations. However, the one interesting factor about this bus strike is you've got 5 unions involved. They're involved from the point of view, the biggest union there is TAWU, the South African Transport and Allied Workers Union, which is COSATU affiliated. NUMSA is there, because they're becoming more and more a generalized union, and that's part of SAFTU. There are SAFTU unions, South African Federation of Trading, the ones that are led by Sorenzima Vavi as General Secretary, and there are NACTU unions, National Council. So in fact, there are representatives of every single major federation already in there cooperating together. It's in that sense, it's quite a good sign about union unity. In the meantime, however, the federations beyond that are competing with one another for members, for influence, etc. So it's a rather messy business.
Thank you so much for your time. I think that's where we leave it with you, Labour analyst Terry Bell. And of course, just touching base on an update on that bus driver strike as it enters, well, nearing the end of its 3rd week there. Of course, we'll have to continue to monitor the developments in that story.